Good morning. How are you today? I am sitting here getting ready for my day, and if you'd like to stick around with me while I do so, I have a story to tell. I'm going to be talking about the prison experiment, the Stanford prison experiment. So if you would like to hear about it, stick around, hang out with me for a little bit. I would really appreciate it. Anyway, imagine it's the 1970s and you're a male student at Stanford University. You find out about this psychological experiment that's going to be taking place. It is a 2-week role play experiment. Some will be guards, some will be prisoners, and you just have to role play for a little bit. Make $15 a day. This appealed to a lot of young college students because, what young college student doesn't want to sit around and study in a jail cell and get paid for it? They had no idea what kind of nightmare they were actually signing up for. This all started with one man, Philip Zimbardo. Philip Zimbardo, he was born March 23rd of 1933 to George and Margaret Zimbardo. George and Margaret, they were Sicilian and they immigrated to New York from Sicily. They settled down in the South Bronx and they had their 4 children. Philip Zimbardo being the oldest of the 4 children. Then he had a sister named Vera, another brother named George Jr., and then a younger brother named Doug. Philip Zimbardo came from a very poor family. They were very uneducated and they depended a lot on welfare. With that being said, he actually moved 31 times as a child. His father, George, he was an electrician, and his mother, Margaret, she stayed home with him and his siblings. Growing up poor in a neighborhood with such poverty and prejudiceness, being Italian, he said this is what really fueled his curiosity into human behavior, especially good versus evil. But despite his family struggles, Zimbardo, he really excelled in school. He went on to go to Brooklyn College and graduated with a degree in psychology. He actually did a triple major, psychology, sociology, and anthropology. And then he went on to Yale University where he earned his master's and PhD in psychology. Then Zimbardo, he went on to be a professor at Stanford University. He was deeply influenced by the Milgram obedience study and wanted to test how roles in environments impacted behavior. He had an idea that it wasn't bad people, it was bad situations that people would be in, and that people who were given power and letting that power go unchecked caused them to do evil things. So in 1971, Zimbardo set up a mock prison in the basement of the Stanford Psychology building. I'm dripping here. Okay, where's my... When word got out about this experiment, over 70 students applied. He only needed 24 students to participate in his experiment, so he went through a process of elimination. Any of the students who had any type of criminal record or have been to prison or jail were automatically eliminated. The participants were also made to go through a test to make sure that they were psychologically stable. Once he did that, he went through and he picked his 24 participants. These participants were made to sign an agreement that they were not allowed to leave the experiment unless there was something physically wrong with them. Most of the participants, they wanted to be guards. They wanted to sit around in their little prison cell and study. They weren't really interested in being guards. But not everybody could be a prisoner. So Zimbardo, he flipped a coin to determine who would be guards and who would be prisoners. He then went ahead and he gave his guards their little role-playing costumes. They were given khaki shirts, a nightstick, and mirrored sunglasses. He then instructed these guards to maintain law and order, do not let the prisoners escape, and he told them the prison, like the control of the whole prison, it was really up to them. So what could go wrong here, right? We have 24 males being locked in a basement to conduct an experiment without any real sense of direction or anything. I think it was a disaster just waiting to happen. Well, I know it was a disaster. But anyway, I don't know how anybody could think that situation was a good idea. Anyway, Zimbardo, he was working with local law enforcement, and he actually had them go to the homes of the participants and arrest them on the first day. The participants were taken to the police station where they were fingerprinted and, all the things as if they were actually going to jail. After they were done at the police station, they were all blindfolded and taken on down to the basement of the Stanford Psychology building. White as a ghost. Once they got down there in the basement, they were made to stand in a hallway. And they were told to take off all of their clothes. They just had to strip all their clothes off. They weren't allowed to keep anything. They weren't allowed to keep their underwear. They weren't allowed to keep their socks. They were given these nylon stockings to put on top of their heads to simulate like their head being shaved or whatever. After they got their nylon stockings on, they were made to stand with their hands up against the wall. And they had to go through like a delousing process where they were sprayed with this substance that would kill any germs or lice that the prisoners may have had, really trying to simulate that prison dehumanization. After the delousing process, they were given like these smocks. The smocks were pretty long. They went down to like their mid-thigh, which is kind of good because they had nothing else. And these smocks had little Velcro numbers on them. These little Velcro numbers were their prison numbers. And then they were led to their little prison cell. Well, their prison cells were just 3 bedrooms off of this hallway, and each bedroom had a few beds in it. The doors of these rooms, the windows were taken out, and they were replaced with bars to simulate little jail cells. The guards, they really wanted to start establishing their dominance pretty early. It really started with one man, Dave Eshelman. He was a fraternity guy, and he was used to like the whole humiliating prank playing scene that he had going on at his fraternity. The other guards, they kind of just followed his lead. He had an idea that this experiment was supposed to show all the negative effects of prison, and he thought the prisoners just sitting in there was pretty boring. They denied the prisoners their books immediately. Any idea of sitting in there studying, that just wasn't going to happen, But Dave, after his little fraternity hazing experience, he wanted to ramp things up, and he started doing drills, little mock drills with the prisoners, where he had them coming out doing push-ups and chanting, making the prisoners say they loved each other, anything to really humiliate them, refusing them any eating utensils. The prisoners, they were instructed to call the guards Mr. Correctional Officer, and they were told they could only refer to themselves by their prison number. And the prisoners, they weren't taking this very seriously at first. They thought it was all a joke. They had this thought process like, they can't really hurt us, like, we don't have to really listen to them. But the guards, they really weren't having that. They were set on establishing their control, and they escalated their punishments, continuing to try to humiliate them in any way possible. My little nose. The prisoners who were rebelling the most, they started getting kind of selectively punished by the guards. They were doing this to try to, get them to cooperate and respect them forcefully. It was a whole power struggle in this basement of Stanford University, let me tell you. The prisoners, they didn't really have anything else to do. They really felt like their role in all of this was to just act out, And the guards, they weren't having that. They wanted their prison ran a lot more smoothly. They didn't want disobedient prisoners not listening to them and doing whatever they wanted to do. So they decided to ramp things up. They would not leave these prisoners alone. When bedtime came around, they decided they weren't going to let these prisoners sleep. They were coming in about every 2 hours, waking them up, bringing them out in the hallway, making them do these mock drills or whatever, and it's only day one. But the prisoners, they quickly realized that when the door opened, it was coming into the room, and they were like, you know what? If we put our beds up against that door, they can't come in here and wake us up. So they did. Yeah, they did that. And when the guards came back and realized they couldn't get into the rooms, they lost it. And they forced their way into those little rooms. And when they made it in, they took their beds. So on the very first night, the prisoners had their beds taken from them. One of the prisoners, his name was Doug, he was like, oh, nope, I'm not having that. He began screaming and yelling and, disobeying, trying to say, like, I'm human, you can't do that to me. And he didn't want to be recognized by his prison number, so he took his numbers off. He threw them out the bars of the gates, and the other prisoners, they kind of started following him. So now we had, like, two leaders, Dave, he was the leader of the guards, and now Doug, he was becoming the leader of the prisoners and the whole rebellion that was going on in there. But the guards, they weren't going to allow the prisoners to do that and disrespect them like that. So they decided they were going to take their smocks away. And Doug, he's the one who started it, so they really had it out for him. They actually chained him naked to one of his cellmates, which a young, straight college male naked in a small room chained together to another man is like their worst nightmare, They were probably freaking out in there. I'm pretty sure these young men, they were probably beyond horrified, okay? But the next day, Doug realized that the locking mechanism that locked the doors so they couldn't get out, it was actually inside of their little prison room. So he had an idea that he could get one of the screws out so it would unlock, and him and the guy he was chained to could escape. And so on day 2, they took turns watching for the guards and getting this screw loose. And when they eventually got the screw loose, they were like, okay, we need to wait for shift change. When everybody's busy, the guards won't be paying attention to us, we can make our great escape. And they really believed that they were going to escape. So they got that door open, and these two naked men chained together, they just started hobbling on down that hallway, trying to get out of there. Unfortunately, the two were caught, and they were thrown right back into their little cells. Doug and the other prisoner, they were upset. They're still naked, they're still locked in these little cells, they feel hopeless. So they start yelling through the gates, yelling at the guards. Well, I said gates, but the bars. They start yelling through their bars at these guards. And one of the guards, he just wanted them to shut up. So he went ahead and he took a fire extinguisher. And he sprayed the prisoners with the fire extinguisher. And him and the other guards, they thought this was funny. As if it was some, kid joke. This was going way too far, and it was only day 2. And I believe at this point, Zimbardo should have stepped in, okay, we can't chain two young men together naked. We can't take their beds. We can't spray them with fire extinguishers. This was out of control. But Doug, he was fed up at this point. He was done. He wanted out of there. He didn't want that $15 a day anymore. He just wasn't doing it. And he decided he was going to pretend to be sick so that he could get out of there. At first, the guards, they didn't really pay it any mind that he was playing sick. It's only day 2, and he wants out of there. So he came up with this plan. He's going to pretend that he is sick so that he can get out of this prison and back to his normal life. He didn't want this $15 a day anymore. He wanted to go home. Just so. At first, the guards weren't really paying him any attention, as if they kind of didn't believe he was sick. But he claimed he had a stomach ache, and he was eventually brought to the back where he met Zimbardo. Actually met him for the first time. He said Zimbardo was quite larger than him, a 6 foot tall, 220-pound man who was really intimidating to him as, a young prisoner who was 5'8", only 110 pounds. And Zimbardo, he had told him he didn't want him to leave. He was like, we're making history here. You are the leader of the rebellion. You can't just leave. So Doug was led back to his cell. And he was feeling it. And he still wanted out of there. He was desperate. He began yelling and acting a fool. He was more rebellious than he had been the previous 2 days. And this led to him being placed into the hole, which is actually just a small closet at the end of this hallway. And it was really dark in there. There was absolutely nothing in there. They put him in there, they locked the door, and he started screaming. He wanted out of here. The guards, once again, they just ignored it. They let him scream. They didn't think anything was really wrong with him. But eventually, they were convinced. They were like, you know what, this has got to stop. And they called his girlfriend, and they're like, look, you think you can come, pick him up? He's having a bit of a mental breakdown, and he just wants to go home. So she's like, sure. And she gets him, and Doug, he's out of there with a quickness. But it's only day 3, and Zimbardo, he just lost one of his prisoners. So he decided he would call another one of the applicants who was originally denied and ask him to come along. His name was Clay Ramsey, but he came on in to take Doug's place. Ramsey arrived at the prison on day 4. He had to do the whole stripping and delousing process, and then he was led to his cell. At this point, the guards, they had all of the other prisoners kind of broke. They were just following along with whatever they wanted, the guards wanted. And Ramsey, he was new, fresh from the outside world, and he was like, what is going on here? There ain't no way I'm listening to you. So he had no idea the trauma that the other prisoners had already experienced with these guards. And they had been sleep deprived and everything else. They were just exhausted. The guards, on the other hand, they only worked 8-hour shifts. So they were able to go home in between and sleep, communicate with their family, do all the things, any of the things that they wanted to do after their 8-hour shift ended. The prisoners, on the other hand, they were just stuck there. They were not allowed to leave. 24 hours a day, stuck in their little cell. They probably didn't even know, what time of day it was. They were clueless about anything going on in the outside world. But the guards, they were far from exhausted. They continued to come into work each day on this experiment, and each day it was almost as if they were determined to top the harassment that they had inflicted on the prisoners the day before. They were still sleep depriving these inmates. They would claim the inmates did something just so they could be punished, even if the inmates didn't actually do anything. They just wanted to. Clay Ramsey, he wasn't having any of this, and he wasn't going to cooperate with. And this really gave the guards a reason to kind of pick on him and single him out. Clay, he was like, oh no, I'm not doing this. He wanted out of there too. He hadn't even been there a whole day. And he's like, I'm going on a hunger strike. The guards, they were infuriated when this happened. They were trying to do anything they could to force this man to eat, including trying to jam the food down his throat. And I'm just reading all this. It's day 4 of an experiment. Zimbardo is watching all of this. He is the warden. He is in charge. And he's just watching them try to force a man to eat. None of the other researchers were there and were like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. No, it's a little inhumane. This is torture, guys. Stop it. Nope, nobody said a word. But Ramsey, he was pretty strong. He held up, and he did not eat none of that food. And this led to him being put in the hole. But they also sleep deprived him the night before. So he didn't really care that he was put in the hole. He found it kind of peaceful, and the most peace he had gotten since he had been there. And he took this opportunity to rest. And the guards were like, he still needs to eat. And they decided they would bring the other prisoners in on this. And they told other prisoners that if Clay kept up his hunger strike and he still didn't eat anything, that they would be losing their blankets that night and they would be made to sleep on their bare mattresses. Now, these prisoners have not even been there for a whole week. They had already been through so much. They did not want to be sleeping on their bare mattresses, and they were getting up every 2 hours to bang on the door of the hole, still trying to convince Clay to eat. And at night, that is when the harassment from the guards got worse. Zimbardo wasn't there at night, and I don't know that he was 100% aware of everything that was going on when he was not watching over the guards and the prisoners. But the guards, they were actually sexually humiliating the prisoners. They were made to simulate sodomy, and some were told to act like animals, dogs, being made to get into different positions, like a dog position, push-up position, all of these things where they would simulate these sexual acts, where they were being told hump like a dog. Just disgusting, off the wall things. I don't even really want to say it, but this is what happened. Things weren't just like a role playing experiment anymore. It was psychological abuse and, torture for these prisoners. But on day 6, Zimbardo, he decided that he would bring his girlfriend, Christina Maslock, to check out his experiment. He was kind of proud of it and he wanted to show it off. He said, come look what I got going on in here. When she got there, she about broke down in tears. She was like, no, this is wrong. She knew as soon as she got there that something was off. The way the prisoners were being treated, it was just disgusting. And she didn't understand why Zimbardo was participating in this behavior. And she told her he needed to shut it down. And Zimbardo said that was like his wake-up call. Like, you're right. I need to shut this down. And so on just day 6, not even halfway through the experiment, it was over. The prisoners, they were so relieved. They wanted out of there. But the guards, they didn't seem as happy. One of the guards even said, oh man, I was just getting started, which blows my mind. Getting started what? You had already went to the extreme. But anyway, the fallout from all of this was huge. The media, the academic world, everybody, they wanted to know what the hell happened in that prison. Some people argued the guards were just playing along. Others said the situation revealed itself, that, how easy it is for people to become cruel. But Zimbardo, he believed this experiment showed it's not bad people who do bad things. It's bad situations that turn good people cruel. He said that when power goes unchecked, anybody can become corrupt. He called this process of people crossing that line from good to evil the Lucifer effect. He went on to do media interviews, TED Talks. He even testified in court cases. He testified in the Abu case, the one where the real life soldiers abused the prisoners. Have you heard about that one? Anyway, why do you think things spiraled like this? How did regular college students turn into such cruel guards, and these confident young college men end up in the fetal position crying in mock prison cells? I believe it comes down to a few psychological forces. The first psychological force I believe plays a role in this is de-individualization. The psychological force, de-individualization, that is like when people lose their sense of identity and they feel less responsible for their actions. Like the act of wearing a costume, the guards, they were given their, khaki uniforms and their sunglasses and their nightstick. I don't think they felt like college students anymore. They felt like guards, and they felt like this behavior was acceptable for their role. So in the end, they're like, it wasn't me. I would never do that. That was just the role I was playing. Duh. That would be de-individualization. The second psychological force I think is responsible here is obedience to authority. And that is when people think they're just following orders or working under a higher power, and they completely ignore their morals. So here in this story, they believed that they were supposed to show prison was a bad thing, and they were trying to make prison as worse as possible for these college students. And it didn't really matter how far they went. Like, nobody stepped in to stop them. Zimbardo, he was the leader of all of this, and he seemed completely fine with it all. Even in his presence, this cruelty continued. The third psychological force I think is responsible here is role absorption. And this is where the guards and the prisoners, they stopped just acting and they actually started taking on that role. The guards, they felt like guards. And the prisoners, they felt like prisoners. They became that role. This is also called role internalization, and it's where you just become the role that you are given, especially when that role holds power or even no power. The fourth psychological factor I think plays into all of this is the bystander effect. There were so many researchers involved in this, and nobody did anything about it. And that's kind of what the bystander effect is. When you see all this stuff going wrong and you do nothing, you just sit and watch. Like, a car accident happens and you just stand there like, is somebody gonna call the police? So everybody watching, seeing all this bad stuff happening and nobody's acting on it. So that is the bystander effect, which is really common actually, especially when we're out in the real world and something happens. But I believe it's actually really dangerous to stay quiet. You should always speak up. You should always say something, do something. It's dangerous not to. You could save somebody for real. Anyway, what would you have done differently? Would you have done anything differently? You think you would have been able to stay sane as a prisoner in this type of environment? Maybe this experiment was proof of something like way deeper. Or maybe it was just a flawed experiment that went way too far. I'm still trying to figure that out myself. So let me know what you think. So you can go ahead, let me know your thoughts, opinions in the comments. Maybe you would like to hear me talk about a different story. Oh no, messing up here already. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications so you don't miss the next one. I will be uploading to multiple platforms, and I will try to be as responsive as possible. to anybody who messages me, and I will try and get as many videos out there as possible. I've actually already got a list. I told some people that I wanted to start doing this, and they're like, cool, this is what we want to hear about. But I do want to stick to like psychology, true crime, mysteries, all that stuff. I study psychology, and I am very fascinated by human behavior, especially bad human behavior. Understand why people do the things they do. I could never. But anyway, those are some of the things that interest me. And maybe, just maybe, I will hear from you guys soon. I'll link all of my social medias down below, wherever you may be watching this. I can't open my lip oil. That sucks. Oh, we'll use this one. Anyway, I will try to link everything so you can go ahead, keep up, follow along, and have an amazing day. I hope to see you guys soon. Bye.